What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Ask E Everything. Wherever you are, I hope you're enjoying your day. I hope you're thriving. And I just hope that you're out there doing whatever you love and not being too stressed out by everything that's going on. The question for today is, are we too eager to return to pre-pandemic life? This is a question that I know a lot of people might be thinking about in some capacity. It's certainly a question that, depending on how you view it, has been kind of bouncing around in the mainstream media. When I'm asking this question today, it's kind of got a twofold or two-prong attack. I'm using the word we instead of you because I want to think about this in two ways. The first way is, are we as a country, are we as a world too eager to return to pre-pandemic life, to return to life the way it was prior to this pandemic? And the secondary part is to consider replacing we with the word you, as in our me and you. Are we as individuals too eager to return to life pre-pandemic? Now, some of you might be sitting out there thinking, why the hell would he ask a question like this? Of course we're eager to return to life the way it was prior to this pandemic. But why I'm asking it is, I really think it's important to be reevaluating what we're so eager to return to. When we look at it from a country or a nation or even a world perspective, depending on where you are watching this, it's a fair question. There's been many stories going on around, kind of all sorts of media outlets discussing whether or not it's too early to reopen, or whether or not we're forcing it, or whether or not the pandemic could spread more. And honestly, this video should take the approach from any angle, whether you even believe in the pandemic at all, or you believe that numbers are being messed around with, or what have you. The point is, you can take the pandemic for exactly the way they're portraying it, or pretend it doesn't exist. We still have a big question to ask here. Are we going too fast? Are we too eager to just get back to a life that might not have been that perfect or that great in the first place? We know that there's pressure to rebuild and reopen the economy. We know that there's pressure to get people back to their jobs and just to really get back to this flow state that we were in, right? Where Trump's economy was the best that it's ever been, and where everyone seemed to be just happy-go-lucky and life was perfect. The reality is, and I'll call everyone out on this, that really isn't the case, right? And if you're sitting there thinking, no, my life was perfect before this pandemic hit, then you can stop watching the video right now. But if you're someone like the majority of people that I know I would get an answer from if I asked them this question, and you're sitting there thinking, wait a second, was my life really that perfect prior to this pandemic? Has this pandemic actually done something more valuable than anyone's realizing, which is expose that we as individuals and as a nation and as a world might not have actually been in that great a spot prior to all of this happening? When we consider it from the country, again, from the nation perspective, what we're seeing here when we watch all these bills be drawn up to provide relief and to kind of fix things that are all kind of broken. We've got healthcare issues, we've got finance and economy issues, we've got kind of this attachment to a labor force and a job and what it means to help people survive. Obviously income comes from your job, but the fact that healthcare is tied to it, and that once we actually go without work for any period of time, our basic whole structure with regard to our family and household crumbles because we no longer have the perks that we had from having that job. And then we've got this economy, which is crazy depending on how much you follow it. You've got kind of the stock market continuing to rise, and a lot of the sectors where people are already wealthy and aren't being as affected by the pandemic, those folks are still kind of thriving, and it's almost as if it's not happening. As a matter of fact, you could argue that they're taking advantage of a lot of the situations. I mean, look at companies like Amazon and companies like Zoom and all these other companies that are basically having a mass outbreak of success because they're in some ways responsibly and in some ways irresponsibly taking advantage of the situation. So the question becomes on that front, are we too eager? Are we too eager to get back to a pre-pandemic life, which as a nation probably wasn't even that great to begin with? Now, sure, life is generally pretty good, but what I'm saying is this is an opportunity to highlight what was wrong with life and with our nation as far as laws go and rights go, and different things like healthcare and economic stability and equality, gender equality, all these big things. Isn't it a great time to stop and say, hold on a second, before we just rush back to just being the country that we were prior to this damn thing happening? Shouldn't we say, pump the brakes and look around and go, maybe it's time to make some changes and get out of this mindset that we're going back to this kind of life? This is the same thing I talked about in my new normal video, where there's a lot of this verbiage about getting back to work, getting back to the way things were. Life doesn't go backwards. As a matter of fact, the only sure thing about life, and this is a great Robert Frost quote, he said, I can sum up everything I know about life in 3 simple words. It goes on. I love that quote because it couldn't be more simple and true. The reality is life goes forward only. It's a one-way street. There's no such thing as going backwards. You only go forward. And that's the way to be thinking about this. So instead of all this verbiage which is forced on you about returning to this, going back to this, the way things used to be, the old ways, the good old days, all of this stuff is just kind of jargon. And honestly, it's put out by the media and basically by folks as a way to kind of just end up controlling your behavior. So that's the question. And if you're not happy with the way that life was, you can actually say, you know what, yeah, the country wasn't really great prior to that. Then it's a great time to kind of speak up about that and get those conversations rolling. Now, secondary part of this, as it pertains to yourself as an individual, you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, either he's an a-hole because he's suggesting that my life wasn't good, or maybe you're thinking I'm unhappy with the way my life was. I don't care really what your judgment is. What I'm hoping you're doing is you're sitting there thinking, man, he's got a point. So as always, let's think about it. That's what I've been doing. I've been watching all these videos and hearing the news talk about, is it too soon? Is it too soon? I started to think to myself, instead of just watching these dumb stories and letting them play out the way that the media wants them to, I want to be sitting here as an individual who's free to think about this and think about it for myself. When it pertains to me personally, am I eager to return to my life the way it was prior to this pandemic? For the most part, the answer is no. Now, a lot of things are fantastic and people are going to say, well, he must have been really miserable. It's not that generally speaking your life might not have been great with regard to any of the major sectors. A relationship, maybe your career that you really did love, your finances, your housing situation, your physical situation regarding where you actually live and spend your time, your quality of life, your family dynamic. There are a million categories, and honestly, you're going to have to figure out which ones of those categories are the ones that you need to focus on. But for me personally, as I've had this time to kind of sit around and think about all of this, I had to make some major decisions as far as evaluating what I actually want. Instead of thinking about, do I want to go back to these things, or do I want to return to these things, I'm thinking in a linear way, moving forward in a progressive direction regarding not what do I want to go back to, but what do I want to go forward to? What do I want to, what direction do I want to head in? And honestly, because I've had to have this time to reevaluate these things like my career, things like my financial situation, things like my actual place that I call home, both as actually the apartment I live in, but also just where I am in the country or the world, and all of these things. This is not about a proclamation to shake your life up completely. It's about sitting there, though, looking in the mirror and just asking yourself a more simple way of putting this so that it doesn't seem like a stressful, or that you're attacking yourself, or you're attacking your own situation, is just, am I happy? Was I happy on March 1st, or was I happy on December 31st, 2019, before we really knew what was going on here? And not just are you generally happy, because my hope for all of you would be that you were always generally happy and that you're just kind of taking ebbs and flows and there are down days and there are up days. But what is something about your life before this pandemic that has now been exposed by the situation of this pandemic, or has now, put you in a mindset because of the way that you've started to think about things during this time off? If it's your job you lost, is it a job that you really want to get back to? And if so, what is the reason for that? Is it because it's your source of income and you just feel like you're obligated to return to it because that's the way that you make your money? If that's the case, then you might want to say, is there another way that I could be making that money? Is there another job or another career that I've wanted to look into that now I may have the chance to do? Your career that you had prior to this whole thing might be compromised in some way because of the pandemic. I know mine certainly was. I work in the restaurant business. I've worked in the restaurant business for 20 years. Literally the majority of my life I've been working in the restaurant business in some capacity. That business as we know it going forward is never really going to be operating the way that it was prior to this pandemic. So for me personally, it's a great example. I said to myself, is this even, basically going to be a viable source of income or a viable, source of career, a place to spend my 40 to 50 hours a week anymore? The answer for me is no. And so I'm on this neat journey now where I'm pursuing and reevaluating and looking into other ways to make income. That's just one category, but it's an example of what I'm talking about. Look at your relationship. Ask yourself, how happy am I in this whole thing? How well is this actually going? Prior to the pandemic, you might remind yourself that you had much more of a scheduled or kind of a habitual or just kind of a formulated life. Some people might really enjoy that. And I'm also someone who likes some sort of, kind of nice flow to my day, week, month, and year. However, you can, be, someone who still likes and craves those things, but is able to reevaluate and make some changes so that your new flow or the new, way that you pursue things going forward could be even better than it was. My point is, don't be eager to return to something just because it was okay, just because it was better than the way things are right now for you. That's a common misconception. And I think that's what the media is trying to sell. And I think that's really ultimately, what the big rush is to get back to things. The reality is politics is politics. So, a lot of these major decisions that are made by politicians and by the government, while they look like they're there to help us, most of them are actions that, quote, have to be taken because they have to save face for how they're, appearing like they're handling things. And so while it's not that there are no good-hearted people in politics, a lot of the moves made by the president into the Congress, the Senate, all of that, are really made because they're moves that they feel like they have to do, because if they do not, they're going to really look like, terrible people. So the politics side of it is something that's easy to get caught up in, as in, oh, wow, look, they're really trying to make things better and help us out, and then, kind of save this situation. When it comes to things like the economy, of course, everyone wants the economy to be better, guys, but the reality is at what cost do we want to see a small, increase in the economy? And at what cost is that going to come? Like, is it going to be human lives? Is it going to be, just a second wave of the pandemic? We don't really know the answers to these questions. But whether we're looking at it from that national scope or from a personal scope, the question is really simple. It's like, look at your life just a couple months ago and think about it. Who was I? Where was I? How was I spending my time? What benefits did I have? Financially, was I really in that great of a spot? Or was I just in an okay spot? Was I just kind of making it where I would like to be, doing better, be in less debt, have more savings? Was my relationship really as great as I thought it was? Or has this pandemic now exposed that, that's an area that I need to work on? My family dynamic, my responsibility as, a partner, a husband, a wife, a father, a sibling, whatever it is. This is a chance. You have the time now to actually take, stock of that life that you've been living and reevaluate it. You'll never likely have a time like this again where so many areas of your life will be exposed and will be up for evaluation or reevaluation, however you want to call it. take the time now to do it before you just rush back to your old ways and think that that's the way that you're supposed to spend the rest of your life. It's not necessarily the case. And so the answer to the question for today, as it applies to both the nation, the world, the universe, and to yourself, and yes, I'm calling you out here, the answer is most likely yes. We are too eager to return to our pre-pandemic life. And it doesn't mean we don't want to get back to things that are a little more smooth and a little less chaotic. I'm all for that. But the question is it where you want to go? Is where you were where you want to go? You have a choice right now. You have an opportunity. Take it and take full advantage of it. Look around. Start with one aspect of your life. If you can afford to look into more of them, then do it all together and then come out on the other side guns blazing and just ready to, kind of take on life. If you've got to start slow, make one move and kind of snowball it as things start to unfold and as you have the time. But don't sit there thinking that you, because the government says so or because anyone says so, have to just go, quote, back to what you were doing, who you were with, where you were spending your hard-earned time, how you were enjoying your time. You've got the ability at every moment in life to make changes that will benefit you and end up leading to a more positive and happy and enjoyable life. The one promise is that no one is going to make those changes for you. You have to do it yourself. You've got to stand up, you've got to look in the mirror, and you've got to really dig deep and ask those tough questions, answer them, and then, as always, like we promote on this channel, be positive about it, get in the right direction, and march forward. That's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe and like. Still looking for my second official subscriber, and really any likes. At this point, I'll take any of it. If you're catching up to this video, and it's in a time when it's no longer timely, as far as the date goes, this still applies. Pandemic or not. It could be years after this thing, and it could have all passed and been gone and just a distant memory. It's still always a relevant video in the sense that when you get a moment, when you get a chance to reevaluate, to take a look, to take stock of your life, and look around and see what you could improve upon it for yourself and for those around you, for those you love, it's always a good time to do that. So, regardless of when it is, try it out. I hope you're having a great day, guys. Remember, the only dumb question, as far as I'm concerned, is the one that goes unanswered. Let's continue to ask these questions, think about them, and answer them. And as always, I hope you'll be courteous, be curious. We'll see you soon.